My selfish father gave my 8-year-old daughter a stick for her birthday and told the whole room, "Expensive gifts are only for the other grandkids." Everyone laughed. 20 minutes later, nobody in that room could look at him. My daughter Sarah had just turned 8. We rented a small room at the local community center, the kind with folding tables and a linoleum floor that always smelled faintly of bleach. We ordered pizza from the place on 5th Street, hung up streamers my wife Melissa had picked out weeks in advance, and invited the family. Nothing fancy, just a normal birthday party for a normal little girl, surrounded by people who were supposed to love her. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I didn't walk into that party expecting a confrontation. I walked in hoping, the way you always hope, that maybe this time would be different. That maybe my father would show up and treat my daughter the same way he treated everyone else's kids. I should have known better. I'd known better for years, but hope is a stubborn thing, especially when it comes to your own parents. My dad, Frank, showed up almost 40 minutes late, carrying something behind his back, wrapped in brown paper. The second he walked through that door, he had that same smug little smile he always wore when he thought he was about to be the funniest man in the room. I'd seen that smile at Thanksgiving. I'd seen it at Christmas. I'd seen it enough times to feel my stomach tighten the moment I recognized it. Everyone in the family already knew he treated the grandkids differently. It wasn't a secret, not really, just something people had quietly agreed not to talk about out loud. My sister Rachel's kids got everything. New bikes every spring. The latest gaming systems the day they released. Expensive vacations to places Melissa and I could never afford to take Sarah. Last Christmas, Dad bought Rachel's oldest son a gaming PC that cost more than my first car did, used with 100,000 miles on. Sarah usually got a card, $20 folded inside, sometimes with a sticky note that just said "Happy Birthday" in his handwriting, like an afterthought scribbled while he was thinking about something else entirely. I hated it. I hated it every single year. But Sarah rarely complained. She was young enough and good-natured enough that she didn't seem to notice the pattern the way the adults in the room did. Or maybe she noticed and just never said anything, because kids sometimes protect the people they love from the truth of how they feel. When it came time for presents, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the little pile of gifts, her paper crown slightly crooked on her head, opening them one by one while the family gathered around in a loose circle. Cousins were doing hair, and Aunt was refilling paper cups. It felt for a moment like an ordinary happy afternoon. Then Dad stepped forward, clearing his throat like he was about to give a toast. "Okay," he announced, loud enough that conversations around the room stopped. "This one's from Grandpa." Sarah's whole face lit up. She reached for it eagerly, the way kids do when they still believe without question that the people who are supposed to love them will show it. Dad handed her the long package wrapped in brown paper, the kind of paper you'd use to wrap a fence post, not a birthday gift. She tore into it carefully, the way she always opened presents, wanting to save the paper. Inside was a stick, an actual tree branch snapped to about 2 feet long, bark still rough and unfinished, like he'd picked it up out of his own backyard on the way to the car. For a second, nobody reacted. The room went still in that particular way a room goes still right before it decides how to feel about something. Then Dad burst out laughing, doubling over slightly like he'd been holding it in the whole drive over. Rachel laughed too, quick and easy, the laugh of someone who already knew the joke was coming. A few cousins joined in, uncertain but following the lead of the adults around them. Dad pointed at the stick in Sarah's hands and said, "Kids spend too much time staring at screens. I figured she'd enjoy something from nature." More laughter. Somebody near the drinks table said something about "back in my day." Sarah looked down at the branch in her small hands, then back up at her grandfather, waiting for the part where it made sense, where the joke resolved into something kind. It never came. She didn't fully understand what was happening, not the meaning behind it, not the years of pattern behind it, but she understood the tone. She understood laughter aimed in her direction that wasn't laughing with her. She tried to smile anyway. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said quietly, her voice smaller than it had been all day. That should have been the end of it. A cruel little joke, awkward and unkind, but over. Instead, my father decided to push it further, because that's what he does. That's what he's always done. He can never just let a moment sit. He has to reach in and twist it one more time to make sure everyone understands exactly where they stand. With a grin, he said, "Expensive gifts are only for the other grandkids." Rachel nearly choked on her drink laughing. A few relatives went quiet, glancing at each other, that particular uncomfortable silence where everyone is waiting to see who reacts first. Sarah lowered her eyes to the floor, her fingers tightening slightly around the stick, like she was deciding whether to hold onto the only gift she'd been given or just let it fall. Under the table, my wife Melissa squeezed my arm, hard enough that I felt her nails through my sleeve. I didn't need the squeeze to know what she was thinking. I was thinking the same thing. I stood up, not angry, not yelling, just calm, the kind of calm that comes from having waited exactly this long for exactly this moment. Because 6 months earlier, something had happened that nobody else in that room knew about yet. Something I had been carrying quietly, folder tucked away, waiting to see if I would ever actually need it. I walked over to my backpack, sitting by the coat rack near the door, and pulled out a manila folder I'd brought with me that morning, almost as an afterthought, almost hoping I wouldn't need it. My father's smile started fading the second he saw it in my hands. "What's that?" he asked, his voice already losing some of its earlier confidence. "You'll see," I said. The room grew quieter, the kind of quiet where you can hear the pizza boxes settling on the table. 6 months earlier, my grandmother had passed away, my father's mother, a woman who had spent her whole life being generous, sometimes to a fault, and who had watched her family from a quiet distance for decades, saying very little, noticing everything. After the funeral, I got a call from her attorney. I assumed it was routine estate paperwork. The kind of call every family gets after a funeral, signatures needed here, a copy of this document there. It wasn't routine at all over the years. It turned out my grandmother had loaned my father money. A lot of money. More than $180,000 altogether, spread across more than a decade. Every loan was documented. Every agreement was signed, dated, and notarized. Every missed payment was recorded in careful handwriting in a ledger she'd kept in her desk drawer. My father had spent years telling everyone how successful he was, how well his business was doing, how he didn't need anyone's help, all while quietly borrowing from his elderly mother whenever cash got tight. Most of that money was never repaid. Nobody knew. Not Rachel, not my aunts, not the cousins standing in that room laughing at a tree branch. Nobody knew the man handing out condescending jokes about expensive gifts had been living in part on money he'd never returned to his own dying mother. Before she passed, my grandmother changed her estate plan. The unpaid loans were formally deducted from my father's inheritance, dollar for dollar, down to the cent. She also left a letter several pages long explaining exactly why. The attorney told me I could share that letter with the family if I ever felt it was necessary. I never planned to use it, not until that moment. Not until my daughter was sitting on the floor of a rented community center room holding a stick, while grown adults laughed at her. I opened the folder and started handing copies around the room. Rachel took one, her smile still lingering from a joke that suddenly didn't feel funny anymore. My aunt took another. Pages started turning. My father stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over behind him. "Don't do this," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. Nobody stopped reading. The room got quieter with every passing second, the way a room does when people are absorbing something they can't unsee. The documents showed loan amounts, dates, signatures, repayment schedules that were never honored. Everything was there, black and white, notarized and undeniable. Then people reached my grandmother's letter, and the mood in the room changed instantly. Rachel stopped smiling entirely. One of my cousins looked genuinely stunned, mouth slightly open. My aunt covered her mouth with her hand. My grandmother had written about watching my father play favorites for years, quietly, from the sidelines, never saying anything at the time because she didn't want to cause a rift in the family. She wrote about how he constantly praised Rachel's children in front of everyone while barely acknowledging the others. She wrote about his habit of acting generous with money that, in the end, wasn't really his to give. She even mentioned Sarah by name, not because of the stick. She couldn't have known about the stick, but because the favoritism had been obvious to her for years, obvious enough that she felt the need to write it down before she died. My father started talking fast, making excuses, explaining, blaming everyone in the room except himself. Nobody argued with him. Nobody needed to. The paperwork was sitting right there in their hands, and it spoke louder than anything he could say. 30 minutes earlier, he had been the center of attention, laughing, performing for a crowd that laughed along with him. Now nobody was laughing. Nobody was even looking at him anymore. Sarah walked over and stood quietly beside me. She was still holding the stick. She didn't understand the details of loans or letters or inheritance, but she understood, in the way kids always understand more than we give them credit for, that the room felt different now. That something had shifted. My father grabbed his jacket off the back of his chair and headed for the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed him. Nobody even asked him to stay. Then Sarah spoke in that clear, small voice of hers that somehow cut through the entire silent room. "Grandpa," she said. He turned around halfway to the door and looked back at her. She held the stick out toward him. "You forgot your present." The room stayed completely, utterly silent. My father looked at the stick in her outstretched hand. Then he looked around at everyone else in the room, at faces that used to laugh along with him and now simply watched. Nobody moved, nobody smiled, nobody rescued him the way people always used to rescue him, laughing off his comments, changing the subject, smoothing things over so the piece could hold a little longer. A few seconds later, he turned, opened the door, and left. The stick remained on the gift table for the rest of the party, untouched, sitting there next to the wrapped presents from people who had actually thought about what an 8-year-old girl might want. Nobody touched it. That night, after we cleaned up the decorations and folded the tables back against the wall, I threw it in the dumpster behind the community center myself. A month later, Rachel called me. She apologized, not just for that day, but for a lot of things she said she'd chosen to ignore over the years, patterns she'd noticed and never said anything about because it was easier not to. Several relatives stopped speaking to my father entirely after that party. Others simply kept their distance, the kind of quiet distance that doesn't need an explanation. As for Sarah, she moved on surprisingly fast, the way kids often do. Children have a way of setting things down that adults never quite manage. But every now and then, months later, she'll bring up that birthday out of nowhere, usually at the dinner table or in the car. Not because of the stick itself, not because Grandpa walked out the door and never really came back into her life the same way, but because, in her own words, that was the day everyone stopped pretending they couldn't see, and she was right. That was exactly what it was. An entire room, full of people who had spent years quietly looking away, finally stopped pretending they couldn't see what had been happening all along. If someone in your life has ever handed you a stick while giving everyone else the world, I want to hear about it. I read every comment on this channel, so tell me your story below. Like, subscribe, and come back tomorrow for another one, right here on Reddit Reads.